Welcome to Talking AWS. My name is Dan, and this is a tutorial on using Serverless Framework to create RESTful APIs on Amazon Web Services using Lambda and API Gateway, and how to secure it using Amazon Cognito. We will be using Serverless Framework for this tutorial. Serverless Framework is a set of tools that help you build serverless applications. The Serverless Framework CLI allows you to build serverless applications that can be deployed on cloud providers such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. It has a lot of functionality out of the box, but is also extendable using plugins. It is very similar to AWS SAM, or Serverless Application Model, but has been around longer and is pretty common for making serverless applications on AWS. Amazon Lambda allows you to deploy your code in a pay-per-execution model instead of dedicating a server or container instance to it. Since its introduction, Lambda has become popular for new applications due to its flexibility and ability to scale functions individually. On their own, these functions are unavailable to the outside world and can only be invoked by the AWS API, or by another AWS service triggering an event. To expose our Lambda functions to the outside world, we will use API Gateway. API Gateway is an HTTP endpoint that can proxy requests to other HTTP endpoints, AWS services, or in our scenario, execute a Lambda function. By default, API Gateway is not secured. You can add several authorization methods, one of which is Amazon Cognito. Cognito is an OAuth 2 hosted authentication service. This video will not get into details about how OAuth 2 works. For details, I recommend the book OAuth 2 in Action. A link is provided in the description below. The final version of the source code for this tutorial will be posted on GitHub. That link will also be posted below. Quickly looking at our diagram, we can see we have an Amazon API Gateway connected to two separate Lambda functions, one called public and one called secure. Our public function will return results to anybody, whereas our secure function will return results only if somebody has logged in using Amazon Cognito. Amazon Cognito consists of two components, a user pool and a federated identity pool. Alright, to get started, log into Cloud9 in the AWS Management Console. Alright, and the first thing you are going to want to do is open a new terminal window. Assuming it's not installed already, let's install Serverless Framework. And we do this by typing npm install serverless-g. Once Serverless Framework is installed, we will use the serverless create command to create a scaffolded template using a Node.js template for AWS. And you will notice that Serverless Framework has created an API GW folder for our project consisting of a handler.js file with our function code and a serverless YAML file, which is our project file. Let's open up handler.js. You'll see it contains a single function called hello. We will replace this with a function called public and another function called secure. To save time, I will copy and paste this from another file. And you can see both our public and secure functions return a copy of the input event as well as a message saying either public or secure. Next, we need to inform Serverless Framework of our changes. We will go into our serverless YAML file and declare two new functions, as well as assign them HTTP events from the API Gateway. So now let's delete the initial function as well as commented out boilerplate code. Okay, I've pasted in both function declarations into our YAML file, and you can see both of them have a HTTP method of get, and the first function will respond to the path of public, while the second function will respond to the path of secure. Okay, at this point, let's go ahead and deploy our functions. First, we need to change our working directory to our API GW directory. Now we can deploy using the SLS deploy command. This step will create our CloudFormation template and deploy it to AWS. It will take some time. Now that our project is deployed, you will see two endpoints, one for our public API and the other one for our secure API. We can test these URLs out. To test them, click on them and select Open. And you can see that we received our response from the function with the message public at the top and the rest of it being a JSON copy of our event from API Gateway. Now let's repeat that with our secure endpoint, and we should see the message secure at the top instead. And there it is. At this point, our function is not yet secure. To secure it, let's use Amazon Cognito. Set up Cognito by using CloudFormation resources. We will put these CloudFormation resources in a separate file for readability. Let's create a folder called Resources. Now let's create a new YAML file for our Cognito user pool definitions. Let's open the file we just created and create two resources, one for our Cognito user pool and the other for our Cognito user pool client. For this user pool, we will use the user's email address as their username. Now we will create another YAML file in our resources directory for the Cognito identity pool. Now let's open the file we just created. I will paste in the contents for our CloudFormation script. This script creates a Cognito identity pool as well as an IAM role and attaches it to the pool. Now we need to integrate these changes with our serverless YAML file. Scroll to the top just under the Provider section and create a new section called Custom. We will declare a custom variable called Stage. Our stage variable will contain either the input from the command line option for stage or from the provider. Now scroll down to the bottom of the file beneath our function declarations. We will now add a resources section referencing our Cognito user pool YAML file and our Cognito identity pool YAML file. We have now declared all of the resources we need for Amazon Cognito. Let's deploy with SLS deploy to see what changes have been made. And I will pause the recording as it deploys. Now that deployment has finished, let's head back to the console and see what has been deployed. From the main console, open up Amazon Cognito. Now select Manage User Pools. You will now see the user pool we created. Select the user pool. Inside our user pool, we will find screens for managing users and groups, as well as a bunch of different settings. We will come back to these in a minute. First, click Federated Identities at the top of the screen. Here you will see the identity pool we created. This tutorial does not cover anything regarding the identity pool itself, so once you are done looking around, let's go back to the user pool we created. Once you return to the user pool, click on Users and Groups and create a new user. Enter an email address for your new username. Then uncheck Send an invitation to this new user. Now create a temporary password for your user. You can uncheck the Mark Phone Number as Verified box and leave the phone number text box blank, and then enter your email address again at the bottom. Now click Create User. You can see our user has been created and will require a new password when they log in. Next, click on Domain Name under App Integration. Here we will enter a custom domain name for the hosted UI. This name has to be unique within the region. I will use Recorded Demo for my domain name. Entered, click Check Availability. If available, click Save Changes. Next, click App Client Settings under App Integration. First, enable our app client to be used with our Cognito user pool. Next, we need to define our callback URL and our signout URL. For the purpose of this demonstration, we will just point them to localhost. Next, we want to enable implicit grant on our OAuth flows and enable all OAuth scopes. Now click Save Changes. Next, we want to log into our user account we just created, so we click on Launch Hosted UI. At the login screen, enter the email address and password for the new user you created. Since our new user requires a password change, enter a new password to continue logging in. After logging in, you will receive an error page. This is okay, as we used localhost for our callback address. The next thing you want to do is copy the URL to the clipboard. The URL includes an identity token that we will use in one of our next steps. Let's switch back to Cloud9, create a temporary file, and paste the contents of our clipboard into it. Our URL contains multiple pieces of information, including the ID token and access token. We only care about the ID token, so let's remove everything else. At this point, Cognito is set up, but we still have not told API Gateway how to use it. Let's just verify by clicking through our links. If we open our public link, we can see it still opens as expected. If we click on our secure link, it too still opens. Our final step will be to tell API Gateway that it needs to use Cognito to authorize access to our secure resource. Let's go back to our serverless YAML file and add one last resource. This will be an API Gateway authorizer, which connects API Gateway to our Cognito user pool. Next, we need to tell API Gateway which functions we actually want secured. In our case, it is only the secure function. We do this by adding an authorizer with type Cognito user pools and referencing our API Gateway authorizer. Okay, now we can redeploy our project using the SLS deploy command. Okay, now that we have deployed, let's test our URLs again. First, let's test the public URL. As expected, our public URL returns valid JSON. However, now when we test our secure URL, we will get an unauthorized error. In order to make a successful request, we need to pass our ID token to API Gateway. We will use the command line tool curl to make the request. Next, we will declare our authorization header and paste in our ID token. When you make the request, you will now get the full response including all the JSON for the API Gateway event. You have now accessed a secure resource on API Gateway. The last step in this tutorial is how to remove the resources we just created. First, we must manually delete the custom domain name that we added to Cognito. Go back to our Cognito user pool, select Domain Name, and click on Delete Domain. Now that our domain name is deleted, we can go back to our command line and use Serverless Framework to delete the rest of our resources using the SLS remove command. This concludes the tutorial on how to use Serverless Framework to build a RESTful API with secured endpoints using Cognito, API Gateway, and Lambda. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch this tutorial. If you liked this video, please hit like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell to be notified when we have new content, and if you'd like to support this channel, please visit our Patreon.